So my name is Sami. I'm a PhD student in the Mechanical Engineering Department. I'm working under the supervision of both Dr. Mark Driscoll and Dr. Rolando Del Maestro. So today I'll talk to you about a study that was recently published in the Computers in Biology and Medicine journal. So the title, as you can see, is utilizing a multilayer perceptron artificial neural network to assess a virtual reality surgical procedure. So I'm sure that most of you have a very good understanding of the applications of AI and virtual reality simulators. So I'll just keep this very brief. So as you know, the success rate of the virtual reality in aerospace industry had led to adaptation to the medical field, and more precisely in the surgical field, due to its ability to deconstruct complex surgical procedures into discrete steps, allowing for the trainees to train in a safe environment. And the recent incorporation of feedback, whether it's visual, auditory, or more importantly, haptic feedback, resulted in the increased positive learning outcomes. And the ability of these simulators to collect normal sets of data relating to the psychomotor interactions with the simulator allows or paves the way for the employing of the integration of AI into such systems. And so the integration of AI into these systems not only would allow for greater granularity and precision in classifying the surgical performance, but also allows us to understand the reasons behind the classifications, and which is especially true using deeper or more complex subsets of machine learning, like artificial neural networks, that train that is able to learn nonlinear patterns within a given data set. So the study that was done was basically also a continuation of the studies that were done on the ACDF, on the SimOrtho VR simulator on the ACDF scenario. So the ACDF scenario comprises of 3 animated steps and 4 interactive ones. So the study focuses on the first step of the incision step that requires a user to perform a 2 centimeter transverse box incision. And essentially, this study could be seen as a continuation of the studies that were done on the second and third step, respectively. So, in short, the objective of the study was to develop and employ a artificial neural network machine learning algorithm to classify the performance on the virtual reality scenario, but also to identify the relative importance of performance metrics using a novel approach. So a systematic approach was used in employing or integrating the artificial neural network, relating to both data collection and processing, and then machine learning development. So the first 2 steps were actually done previously in previous studies, where during a trial, surgeons were recruited and their data were taken from the simulator. So the study initially had 27 participants, but a few participants were excluded because they were left-handed, and the simulator was optimized for right-handed individuals. But unlike the other studies, post-residents that had a non-spinal focus were included, because it is seen that essentially the first interactive step was not dependent on the more complex remaining steps, and therefore in total 23 participants were included. So during a simulated procedure, 66 variables were, as I'm sure you know, 66 variables were collected related to the linear angular positions, times, applied forces. And from these main data, 157 metrics of surgical performance metrics were generated based on experts' opinions, publications based on the incision step, and simply novel metrics that could be combined from the above data. So essentially, for example, position and time can be used to generate velocity, which is like the most basic metric, just to give you an example. And then data were normalized before the start of the machine learning model development. So the first step was to properly split the data into training and testing, just to make sure that uh, there will be no data leakage from the testing set to the model development, so we could objectively assess the ability of the model to classify surgical performance on unseen data. And because the classes were underrepresented in the original data set, we used a stratified split where the representation of each class almost remained the same in each of the data sets. So, for example, the senior residents had almost 21% representation in all of the data sets. So following the split and before developing the model, we need to do a feature selection where we remove irrelevant metrics that may not be useful in distinguishing the surgical performance. So the method used in this study was a sequential forward selection algorithm that starts with an empty subset of features and iteratively adds features until the optimal subset is found based on the performance of a built-in machine learning model. And the one that was chosen for this study was the neural network model again. So, but like keep in mind, this is different and distinct from the final model that was built. This is simply a step to filter out irrelevant metrics. Just a quick way to reduce the 157 metrics into, for example, here to 9 metrics that spanned all 3 categories: motion, safety, and efficiency. And so once we have our features, so the MLP, the multi-layer Perceptron ANN was built using Python and the PyTorch framework. So the ReLU activation function was chosen along with the cross-entropy loss, and the optimizer was the stochastic gradient descent with momentum. So early stopping was implemented to prevent overfitting on the data training set, and the validation set was used as the criteria for stopping. So essentially, in general, an artificial neural network would have an architecture consisting of multiple interconnected neurons and multiple hidden layers. And so the hyperparameters would include both types of hyperparameters related to the architecture and related to the training of the model. So the number of hidden layers and hidden units should be related to the architecture of the model, whereas the learning rate and the momentum parameter is related to the learning. And then essentially based on best practices found in literature with similar data sets and similar architecture, I found that essentially that's a non-exhaustive list of potential hyperparameters, and you could have numerous combinations to generate many models. And so to test out the best model, a semi-systematic grid search was used, and the stopping criteria or the validation, the criteria of having the best model again was the validation performance, so the validation accuracy and loss. And this table presents the best performing models in each of the 1, 2, and 3 hidden layer networks. So it is found that the 2 hidden layer network outperformed the rest. And so taking that best performing model, we see the results in the training. So again, the framework that was the code that was written.
Sami, can you just go back? Why did you think the two the 2 hidden layer network worked better, let's say, than 3 or the 1? What would be the reason for that?
So essentially, there is multiple ways to verify that. So this is actually like by itself a very interesting optimization problem where you have multiple variables and you could test out multiple combinations. So I kind of did like I didn't do a fully systematic research because that would take a lot of computing power and a lot of time. So I kind of randomly checked different combinations of what I thought made sense based on the literature data. And the main focus was the validation loss. So the validation loss was the 2 hidden layer was lower than what I found in the previous 1 or 3 hidden layers. Of course, I cannot say with certainty that no other 3 hidden layers, for example, network would attain the same loss, but I stopped once I found something that was good enough, because essentially For the purpose of the study, it reached 100% accuracy in the validation, and it reached the minimum value that I could attain from a systematic or semi-systematic research.
Okay, thank you.
So, for example, there are other ways. So like this could be a local minimum. It could be there is another minimum that is like even better performing, but that didn't convert. My search didn't converge to.
Sorry, can I just ask a follow-up question to that?
Yes, of course.
Sorry, Sam, I'm new to this, so this is more of a clarifying question. But I know that when you do machine learning, if there's an optimal number of features, for example, like it doesn't use layers, but sometimes if you have too many features, it dilutes the outputs, which makes the outcome worse. I don't know if does that happen here with hidden layers as well?
No, actually, it's always better to use more hidden layers than more features. So you're correct in the sense that when you have more features, it becomes dilute, let's say that. But when you use more hidden layers, it actually solves the issue. So it's always better to go deeper than going essentially more features.
Okay. So okay. Thank you for clarifying.
So where does the deep learning come in here? You've got 2 hidden layers, 3 hidden layers. So how many hidden layers do you have to have before you have deep learning?
So different. So actually, different people define it differently. So people define as anything more than one as deep learning, and some people would account for like hundreds and hundreds, because especially when using, for example, machine learning for visual detection. I'm forgetting the word. Visual classification, so image classifications, they use hundreds and hundreds of layers. So, and that's more understood as deep learning. But in our case, it's like one to two hidden layer, 2 to 3 hidden layers. Some people define it as deep learning. Some would just would assume it's like very similar to a simple linear model.
Okay. It's an interesting phenomenon in the sense that with the idea that more than one layer is deep learning, and then suddenly you can have multiple layers, hidden layers, and so it's more semantics than it is anything else.
Yeah, it is.
Doesn't really affect how you actually do the experiment. Just sort of a verbal sort of masturbation, I guess. Okay, great, thank you. Any other questions about this? Because it's a little bit different than we normally see, because we haven't really looked at multiple layers, multiple hidden layers. Although Rakai, maybe you can kick in on this too. What are your thoughts?
I mean, I don't have much to add, but yeah, it's a bit like trial and error, I guess. Using the same structure, sometimes when we try again, we may find a better result or worse result, so that we can never know which one is the most optimal structure. It's just finding the best at the moment and moving forward, I guess.
Yeah, because depending on the initialization of the code as well, the initial values, it might converge to different minima, and therefore you get different results. That is very true.
All right. Well, it's interesting because it's sort of a little bit newer, a little different than we've done before. And what about, you actually had both a validation and a testing layer after that. So you had really 3 things, right? You developed your model, then you validate your model, then you test your model. Do you really think that the small numbers that you had were adequate to do that, or what did the reviewers say about that, about your paper?
I think because the use of more than one hidden layers somewhat solved the issue. So if I stick to one hidden layer, then the number would be more like so the performance of the one hidden layer was like, it was clear to me that it wouldn't be able to attain the same results as deeper layers because of the issue of the very low number of data that I had. And I used the validation to make sure that my model does not overfit on the training. So I directly stopped once I saw that there's overfitting even on the validation. So the loss, so you could see in the training, where's the training? sorry, was it afterwards? Yeah, here. So the training, the validation loss kept increasing, and once it started to slightly increase, I stopped the code to make sure that it's not refitting on the training set.
Yeah. All right, continue on, Sami. Tell us the rest.
All right. So before presenting the results, I'll just introduce the connection weights algorithm. So that was originally developed by Olden and Jackson, which was used to understand and quantify the relative impact of each input feature to each output feature on a classification task. So as seen in the diagram and in the equation, the algorithm computed the sum of the product of each input weight to each output weight. So essentially, so it was originally developed for one hidden layer networks. And so because I found that the two hidden layer network was the optimal one, I adapted the code to a multi-hidden layer network by adding an additional layer. And so this could be seen in a way as if computing the original algorithm and then adding it m times, where m is the number of hidden units in that layer. And similar to the original algorithm, the product can attain both positive or negative values, which indicates how the feature impacts the output in both magnitude and sign. And because the data were normalized before developing the model, we know that, for example, a positive value means that a higher than average value in that feature would increase the likelihood of a certain classification. And also we could use the CWP values to attain the relative importance by finding the ratio of the magnitude of each of the components to the sum of all the components for each class. I know it took me a while to digest the information correctly, and I'm saying it a bit fast. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to stop here and answer.
Yes, I'm Renee, and I'm wondering a little bit about this connection weight algorithm. Can you explain what's the purpose of using this algorithm for?
Yeah, so originally it was developed to see the impact of each input feature to each output feature. So the idea is that you take each of the weights for a single layer network and you multiply the weights and then you do the summation of them. And the theory is that if you, let's say, get a positive value, so you have to look at the magnitude and the sign of that value. So a positive value would indicate that higher than average values would result in higher likelihood of that class, where the magnitude tells you how strong that input feature is. So let me give you an example. Let's say it's the value for a certain the force on the one of the anatomical structures was for the junior resident plus 12, and for the post resident was minus 5. This tells you that the junior residents had use higher forces, and therefore if a new participant would come in and use higher forces, there's a higher likelihood of him being classified as a junior resident, because that feature had a positive value with a large value of 12, as opposed to a post resident which has a negative value in 5, meaning that lower forces would essentially increase the likelihood of classification. And when I say lower and higher, it's lower and higher than the mean average of the forces. Because of the normalization of the data is all essentially, so you know what normalization is, correct? Like if you have a set of data, you normalize about the mean, and it'll be the lower forces would be classified as negative. Not meaning it has negative force, but it means they have lower than average force. So in that sense, that's theoretically what the connection weight algorithm should do. And you could take them. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, sorry. The modification you did was because there was 2 hidden layers, right?
Yes, correct.
And how can you understand this modification? I mean, can you explain a little bit the other sum summatory, or I don't know how to say in English. I'm sorry.
No worries. Yeah. So essentially, if you start, so this diagram starts with the first. So assume everything before was the same, but now you have an additional hidden layer 2. So you do the same, but you start with the first hidden layer, and assuming there is m additional hidden layers, you would do that m times. So for the same computation as before, you're doing the same computation m times. So it's seen as if you're computing and then adding the original algorithm m times, where m is the number of additional hidden units in the additional layer. So that's the only step. So, and you do that for each feature for each class.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So if you had two, you have two hidden layers, so you would double it. Is that what you're sort of?
Depending on the number of hidden units within that layer. So if there is only 2, then yes, so essentially you would compute it twice and add it twice.
Now, one of the other students in the lab, Sharif, has been using Shapley values. What do you think about those? Have you looked into those at all?
I believe I looked at them very briefly. I can't, to be honest, remember exactly what they were, but I've come across Shapley values. Yes, but I can't remember right now what exactly.
Yeah, Sharif, when Sharif was working with, we'll have to get him to give a presentation related to his results, but when he was working with EEG, and which EEG sort of patterns are more associated with expertise, he found that the Shapley values were a little bit better than connection weight values, but in truth, they're pretty similar. So it sort of suggests that both of these systems come out with approximately the same results related to how to sort of differentiate which of the, let's say, input features are most effective in your classification or least effective in your classification. Because in one way, what can happen is, for example, you can have a situation where low values, let's say, in some other thing, some other feature may be associated with expertise, and high values may be associated with non-expertise. So it can go both ways depending on what actually the feature is and what that particular metric is involved with doing related to force or movement or whatever metric that happens to be. Now go back, maybe you should go back once again there to the features that you picked out, because I think that was rather fast.
The final features?
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah. So go through those for us, because those are a little, what do you think about those features?
Yeah.
Or metrics. Let me say metrics. I guess we can obviously say metrics here rather than features.
Yeah. I think it will be more relevant when I explain them with the results. So like we will see, for example, certain features show up. Like show up in both the connection weight products, and then also will show in the permutation feature importance, because I employed another method to validate that, and also shows in the textbook description of the annulus incision task. So in a sense, the interactions with the C4 vertebra was seen to be very important, whether the contact time or the contact length. To be honest, the motion metrics, so sometimes, I try to analyze it and to see to have a deeper understanding of these two metrics, but sometimes the algorithm picks up things that are not very direct in a sense. So this is an example where something that makes sense to the algorithm would not really make sense in a teaching point of view. So how would you teach maximum velocity in the Z direction or the Y direction? But forces, for example, volume removals, contact time, they're more important, I would say, more teachable.
And this was only for the annulotomy stage, correct? Of the anterior cervical discectomy and
the annulus incision, yeah, the incision of the.
Okay, good, thanks.
So I'll continue. Yeah, so that's the connection with algorithm, and yeah, so now, so because it's a new adaptation of the connection rate algorithm, it's not from my to my best of my knowledge, I haven't come across a study that fully describes the application of the connection rate algorithm to a 2 hidden layer network or more. And so we added the permutation feature importance to verify the results and validate the results of the previous application. So the permutation feature importance is seen as a sensitivity analysis in a sense. So you would capture the importance of a certain feature is if by after shuffling the values of that feature and putting it to the trained model, you measure the relative increase of the error of that model, and the higher the increase in the error, the more important the feature is, and you could classify and grade them based on the results. And so I applied both, and then there's the issue of whether you apply it on the training set versus the test set. And again, you would get different information by applying. I'll get that in a second, but I wanted to introduce the permutation feature importance in the slide. And so we move to the results. So again, the trained model or the best performing model achieved 100% in the training and validation, but misclassified an individual in the testing set. So it misclassified a junior resident as a post-resident surgeon. And applying the connection weight product on the 3 classes, we see that almost the top 75% of the metrics are mostly from efficiency in motion. And we also see, again, that there are metrics that are repeated in each of the classes, mainly the interaction of the C4 vertebra and the maximum velocity in Z direction. And so when you look at the results from the permutation feature importance, so again, there is the idea whether you should use the training versus the testing set. So each would give us different information. From a artificial, and if you're doing a machine learning analysis, you would only use the testing set because essentially you'd only be interested in objectively measuring your model. But because we're trying to understand steps or the composites of surgical performance, we're interested in both. And actually, we could see that the training set, when applying the permutation feature importance on the training set, it had higher conformity to the connection weight product, which makes sense because both use the training, the information stored in the training set to obtain that information. Because when you're using the connection weight products, the weights, you obtain the weights from the training set, not the testing set. And so we see that again, the same metrics show up again. So even though the testing set had slightly different metrics in terms of importance, the interaction with the C4 vertebra remained, further supporting that these metrics are important in classifications. So with this in mind, and taking the most important metrics to analyze the misclassified individual, we see that that person had higher than average contact length with the C4 vertebra and higher than average contact time with the C4 vertebra and lower than average velocity. So when you compare that to the junior and post-resident groups, this performance highly diverges from the junior group and resembles the post-resident group. So in essence, it makes sense that this performance has a higher likelihood of being classified as a post-resident group. And so we kind of understand how the algorithm made that mistake and classified that junior individual as a post-resident individual. Again, using the connection weight products, we could analyze the learning patterns, which were previously also found in the previous 2 studies, so related to continuous and discontinuous learning patterns. So the continuous learning patterns is characterized by sequentially improving the skills from the junior to the post-resident level. We see all the safety and the efficiency metrics follow a continuous pattern, with all the safety metrics signifying that the post-residents used lower forces and removed less volumes when compared to the other groups. And so we might want a trainee to to gradually reduce the forces and have less volume removals to improve their performance in the incision task. And similarly, in the efficiency metrics, we see that the post residents interacted mostly with the C4 vertebra and had the least interactions with the other anatomical structures like the posterior longitudinal ligaments. And so again, we would want the trainee to essentially limit their interactions to the C4 vertebra and not interact with other anatomical structures. And so when we compare the performance of the expert groups to the textbook description of the annulus incision task, we see that the surgeon is directed to follow the vertebral body and joints to avoid unnecessary injuries to sensitive anatomical structures, such as the vertebral artery. So this conformity would support us in essentially analyzing the discontinuous learning pattern, where would we want the junior residents to mimic the experts and simply bypass the senior level. So there are a number of limitations in the study, so related to model development and to the simulator itself. So in terms of the model development, the limited available data and the generalization of the model is essentially a limitation. So this study partially addressed this issue by using a deeper model, again, going back to the same discussion that we had before. It also, another limitation is that we need further verification of the novel adaptation of the connection weight algorithm. So even though we adapted we employed the permutation feature importance to verify, we still have the debate whether to use the training versus the testing set. But in this analysis, the fact that the most important metrics relating to the interaction of the C4 vertebra, it basically had a high conformity between the CWP and the permutation feature importance and the textbook description, increases our confidence in the analysis. And the last set of limitations is related to the simulator. So the Awesome Tech simulator was developed and optimized for right-handed individuals, therefore limiting its ability to assess left-handed participants or the ability to assess bimanual performance. Also, the simulator is based on a voxel-based gaming engine as opposed to a physics-based haptics that essentially uses cadaveric experimental data. So studies have shown that when the importance of using cadaveric experiments and employing it in the physics in the physics-based haptics devices, because when generating forces that are not based on experimental values, it might deviate, might generate forces that deviate from reality and therefore ultimately impact the training of the surgeons. And lastly, the simulator detected unusual force transmissions to anatomical structures that would not be usually experienced during the incision task. So namely the forces on the vertebral arteries, the ligaments, and the spinal cord nerves. So even though there's some deviation with reality, the analysis still holds because the expert performance did not result in these unnatural interactions, which further support the ability of the simulator to distinguish in the surgical performance between experts and non-experts. So in short, an artificial neural network was successfully built and tested in distinguishing surgical performance. The novel application of the connection weight product was employed and verified using the results of the permutation feature importance algorithm. And the most important metrics of the different methods of finding the important metric importance coincided with the description of the ACDF incision task. Thank you.